ReasonConf is brought to you by our gold sponsors Ahrefs and Chain Street.
Thanks, John. Good luck.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to my talk. I'm really excited to be here. It's been amazing. I kind of applied for this talk and was very surprised when they picked me because, I don't know, it's just like, it's amazing to be here in Vienna, and this is an amazing conference, so I'm really excited. A little bit about myself. My name is Gage Peterson. I work at Podium, which is a kind of like startup in Utah, which I'll talk a little bit more about. I started using OCaml 4 years ago from a Jane Street talk that I watched and thought it was cool. I just used it, also the maintainer, if you can call it that, Reason cookie. I barely modify it ever, just because it's like very simple bindings. But anyways, not super compelling. But so again, work at Podium. This is our little website. And so Podium is a customer interaction platform. Essentially, we help customers, or we help brick and mortar businesses like auto dealerships and like dentists and other things kind of modernize the ways they communicate with their customers. They tend to be people that like to call people on the phone in the age when you're supposed to text people and stuff like that. So we're trying to help people that are not tech savvy to be more tech savvy and be more convenient for everyone to talk to them. So I live in Utah. It's very far away from Vienna, as you can see. You can also see a weird crack in the earth that is rather concerning. I'm not sure why that's happening, but that's Google Maps for you. So I guess the real question you have probably now is, does Podium use Reason in production? And not yet. And I know that's really very awkward, you know, for this particular talk. So the question is, why should you listen to me? And the main reason I would say is because I've made a lot of mistakes that you can learn from. And the second reason is because I actually have introduced a lot of new technologies at Podium, and I think those lessons can be applied to ReasonML in the future. So, story time. Many of you probably know what this logo is. It's the logo of Elm, another programming language that's very similar to Reason. You know, they're both kind of inspired by ML family languages. Syntax is very similar to OCaml. Anyways, but basically, I tried to introduce Elm at Podium. And I learned a lot of things along the way trying to do that. And so we'll talk about some of the things I've tried. There are probably things that you have tried as well. These are kind of different strategies that may be less effective potentially. And so the first one is just the complain and suggest. So this is essentially where you bash JavaScript or whatever programming language it is. You kind of just say, you know, you're programming something bad, and then something bad happens in JavaScript, like you get a runtime exception, and you say, you know, I have to use JavaScript when Elm is so much better, or Reason is so much better, and you kind of like show somebody how amazing their life could be if they didn't have that problem or whatever. But this is a bad strategy. Don't do this. And the main reason is because everyone just thinks you're a complainer and a baby, because not only that, they also think you don't know anything about JavaScript, because if you did, then you wouldn't have all these problems that you're experiencing. And the thing to remember about this is, while we totally understand that it's still really good. You know, it is arguably better than JavaScript in many ways. You got to remember, JavaScript is actually very popular. And you see that little pink bar at the top? Those are the people that have used ES6 and do not like it. And these are the people that do. And so it's just a bad strategy because it's very, very popular language. And for the general populace, it doesn't work very well. And so unless somebody's actually experiencing a problem, then yeah, not very good. And TypeScript is a little bit more mixed reviews, you could say, but at the same time is also pretty darn popular. So also same goes for that. So another strategy that I tried was called bypassing the human element, where essentially well, basically I'll just describe it with this. They can't stop you from putting in reason and prod if they don't know that you are, right? And in case you're wondering, also bad strategy. In this case, it was Elm. I started writing a project in Elm. I didn't ever ship it or anything. I just kind of started writing the beginning of a project that I was supposed to be writing in React and Elm, and basically, this kind of thing happened where people kind of got mad about it and were like, whoa, isn't that what we do? And even if it was technically a good idea or whatever, it just breaks people's trust, more or less, because then even if you got it into production or whatever, as soon as somebody came across the code, they would be completely, thrown off. They'd never learned the language. It's just not a good strategy. It's nice, if they just tried it, then they would like it, right? That's kind of what you think, but in reality, it just makes people mad at you and not trust you with their code base anymore. Luckily, it didn't go too badly, but yeah, it's not a good strategy, so don't do it. Another thing I tried was getting an ally, and this is actually kind of a good thing. So basically, I just asked somebody if they would like to learn Elm because they were somebody that kind of like me and they liked it. I thought they would like it, and they said okay. And then luckily, they also were a person that was quite a bit more senior than I was, and so as such, they had a convincing argument to more people that were higher up in the company, and eventually, they said, we'll try it. And that's something that was amazing, because I didn't even have to convince anyone. I just convinced one person, and then they convinced other people, which I thought was kind of cool. And so we were kind of partying. We thought, saying on the Elm Slack, Podium uses Elm, even though we didn't ever ship anything or even written any yet, but we kind of thought we were going to. Unfortunately, everyone just went back to writing React. Never really seemed to care that Elm had supposedly been proven to be better, and they didn't seem to care at all either. And so they didn't seem to even, they just kind of went back to writing React. That's just what they did. And so the next thing that I kind of did was assume my idea was good in the first place. Because Elm has a lot of upsides. It's got a lot of cool things. It's got no runtime exceptions, which is just still amazing. It's still really cool. It has enforced semantic versioning. That means essentially you can't push a package up and make a breaking change. You can't remove a function or something and then tell people that, oh yeah, that's just a small change. It's I don't feel like it's that big or whatever. You do the sentimental versioning as it is. And all the libraries have to be documented. There's a lot of really cool things about it. There are much more. Downsides, can there be downsides, right? Am I right? It turns out there definitely is. And in fact, I was in a meeting, and basically, we're very full stack at Podium, meaning everyone writes front-end code and back-end code, and you kind of own everything, and we like that a lot. And along that line, we basically had the decision that every engineer is now a React Native engineer now. So if you add something to the front end, you're supposed to add it to the native app as well. And I thought to myself, Elm doesn't really do native. So that was awkward inside my head, because that meant that essentially everyone had to write something in React, or write it in Elm, supposedly, and then rewrite it in React, and that just seemed kind of like a really dumb idea. And so in the end, kind of ended up, at least in my mind, being kind of a failure for me, just because it didn't really meet our needs. And it totally could meet your needs. It's not a bad language. It's a really great language. But, you kind of think about it. Is Reason a failure? And absolutely not. Reason, you can use it with React, and it has a ton of potential to be very interesting to other React engineers. And so anyways, the first step, I think, along this journey of helping people to use Reason is to have empathy for them and the way that they think. Because a lot of the things that happened to me previously in Elm happened because I didn't really understand how other people think about the benefits of a language and kind of trade them off. There's this awesome article I highly recommend you read. It's also kind of the namesake of this talk, which is why your F# evangelism isn't working, which is interesting because F# is actually kind kind of inspired by OCaml and probably many other languages. And so that was interesting. I'm like, well, this probably applies to me. So anyways, there's this, it talks about this adoption life cycle, which is from a book called Crossing the Chasm, lots of references. But essentially, they introduce like different types of people. And so essentially on the left, you have people that are very open to adopting new technologies, even inventing new technologies, to the people on the far right that literally do not want anything to do with technology if they could ever help it. And so there's kind of like this spectrum of different types of people. I could go into all the different types, but in reality, it's a lot easier to just simplify it down to early adopters and pragmatists. These are essentially, you know, we'll kind of talk about like who these kind of people are. But so early adopters, guess what? That's probably most of us in here. Are they like to find hidden gem kind of technologies. They like to rely on their own intuition to make technology decisions. They like to kind of they learn new technologies extremely quickly, and they like to program just to program. Like they tend to just like to create things. Just kind of they like the art of programming in a lot of ways, just for the sake of it. And pragmatists, they're very different in a lot of ways. They like to get stuff done, you know. And they want to avoid fads. That's a huge thing about them. They really want to not invest in technologies that would go away or stop being supported or other kind of scary things to them. And they rely a lot on other pragmatists' opinions about a technology, whereas early adopters don't really. They kind of like rely on their own opinion. And they can't, a lot of them can learn technologies quickly as well, but they don't really want to, unless they have to. And so another interesting thing about this curve, well, first let's ask, like, where do we think reason is along this curve? And I put it about right here, which may seem a little kind of crazy or whatever, but when you look at this survey, and you kind of look at it, about 5%, or 5.6% of people actually used it that took the survey. I know it's a survey, and so it maybe has some bias as to who took the survey and other things like that. There's a lot of things like that, but just for kind of like a rough estimate, that's kind of where I put it along the graph. And so, as you can see, there's also this weird gap in this bell curve. And so we call this the chasm. And the main reason it's called the chasm is because a lot of dead technologies sit at the bottom of this chasm that don't ever get from the early adopters over there. Google Glass, I was going to put Google Glass down there, but it didn't fit. But, you know, maybe with CoffeeScript and some other things. But anyways, although you could argue that CoffeeScript actually made it across the chasm, even though it shouldn't have. Anyways, hopefully you don't like that. So anyways, the real reason that it exists is because there's a fundamental difference between early adopters and pragmatists. Like, they're just very different personality types. And so let's go through those differences. Again, early adopters are driven by a pleasure of exploring, where pragmatists are driven by the desire to get things done. Like, technology is just a means to an end for them. It's kind of like this annoying thing that kind of happens before they get something on the screen. Or, you know, it's kind of like the way they feel about it. And we don't rely, or pragmatists or early adopters don't rely on well-established references. Like, we don't really care that like every big company is using it or not using it. We kind of like just, if it's good, then we just use it or whatever. Pragmatists definitely do not feel this way. They want desperately to use the technology that everyone else is using, because then they get all the benefits of the community, and for good reason. It's totally a good argument. And they really care about trying to weed out fads and not like just jump on every bandwagon that comes along or whatever. That was a bit of an accident. They also, so a very kind of like way to summarize the way they feel is they would rather choose something predictably disappointing over something excellent and proven every time. Like, they'd much rather invest in, like, they'd rather have the problems that they're comfortable with rather than the problems that they are unknown. It's kind of the way that they tend to feel about it. And I know all this can be kind of saddening, because you're like, oh man, we're so far back on the curve, we're never going to make it, it's a huge chasm now, and we're going to become Google Glass and whatever. But But don't be sad. We can do this together. Like, we're all here at this conference, and we can make it happen. But the question is how. And I'll do my best at describing it, what I've learned more or less from it, and the things I've seen at Podium that kind of help with that, with different technologies that we've adopted. So for high level, you really want to alleviate pragmatist pain. But the thing about it is, yeah, we're like, yeah, I know that. But the thing is, a lot of times we assume people that are in pain when they are not. Very good example of this is, at least my coworkers, and I feel like most JavaScript programmers, don't actually care that much about runtime exceptions. I know that's kind of crazy to think, but because they cause them lots of grief, probably. But in reality, they're just kind of like feedback to them. They're kind of like, as much as we have compile time errors, they have runtime exceptions. They just go, when they see one, they just click through the app, and then when they see one, they go and find the place it is in the code, and they fix it. And maybe it's a little hard to find sometimes, or maybe customers are experiencing it. As long as they don't look too much at like Bugsnag or whatever, then it doesn't seem so bad or whatever. A lot of times, people are very much pragmatists, especially, are people that feel that they're trying to create a good experience for their customers, but they're also just understand that bad stuff happens sometimes or whatever. So anyways, so let's go through kind of another story that is maybe a little more successful, and is how Elixir was introduced at Podium. So Elixir has a lot of cool pros. It's functional, it's immutable, side effects are okay, like you got some pragmatism in there. The actor pattern is built in, and it's got crazy concurrency, it's really fast, and it also has macros, which is like PPXs that allow you to write code that writes code, maybe not quite as safe. Turns out, none of this matters to pragmatists, more or less. The reason, and so anyways, more or less, like, the pain we had was Ruby was expensive to scale, and it was kind of hard, and we were kind of looking for another language because we were kind of struggling with that. And Elixir was supposed to be faster than Ruby, and so why don't we try building something in Elixir? And so we did. And so we built the URL shortener, and it worked perfectly. And almost too perfectly, because we never got to write Elixir anymore, because it just never really needed any maintenance. But anyways, but the fact is, when we built this URL shortener, we really didn't use any of the fancy Elixir features that were the selling points of Elixir. But we still liked it better, because it just seemed to be kind of reliable and good. And now we're actually the company that probably has the most Elixir engineers. From Jose Valim, we got on a call with him. He was really surprised by the fact that we had like, 100 or so Elixir engineers all at one company, and so that was pretty cool for us to find out. And so, really, like, Elixir to like a pragmatist view is really like, it's fast, it's easy to learn. We tend to have fewer problems, and eventually we actually started to appreciate all of those other things on the other list, like the concurrency and the reliability and a lot of the other stuff. But that kind of came later. It was really just very much. It's really just, like, it didn't cause us too much problems, and it was, just seemed overall better. So another story. I also introduced a concept called event sourcing to my personal team. I work, this is our website, and I work on this little guy down here. It's on our website, but it's also on a lot of other people's websites. It's a little third-party JavaScript plugin, or a little script that people include on their website. And it looks very kind of like simple, and when you use it, it's actually very simple as well. Basically, when you click on the bubble, it allows you to fill out a form, and then it'll text you to your number so that you have the company's texting line, and so that it kind of starts that conversation a little easier. And it even works on desktop and on other things. But but the thing is, it's actually rather difficult because it has to be an iframe, so everyone doesn't attack us with their crappy CSS and everything else. So it's an interesting domain. But more or less, the problem we had was the back end of web chat wasn't scaling very well. And the main reason is because this was kind of our architecture. It doesn't really matter so much, but essentially you have website visitors on the left, and then you have the web chat backend that kind of like proxies requests over to the slow Ruby monolith that we still kind of have. and then that hits Postgres eventually, and it kind of runs back and up and down the line. And the problem is, as the website visitors grew, the Ruby monolith kind of was on fire, and then it was more on fire, and then it was like, and at this point they were like, okay, you basically have to put your data in your backend and get off our Ruby monolith. And we're like, okay, that's fine. We got other things to do though. I think it's not so on fire. It's fine. And then it was like crazy bad on fire, and so we were like basically had to put it in our backend. And so at that time, I just happened to learn about event sourcing from a conference talk. I'll describe it a little bit, but the concept itself doesn't matter so much. But essentially, learned about that. My mind was blown, kind of like how you feel like when you learn Reason. And it was really cool. It had all these awesome, fancy benefits, like immutable databases, and you could replay your data to generate new reports because you have a immutable log of history, and it was really cool for that reason. And you can create an audit trail so you can know that any user did anything at any point in time, and it was just really cool. But none of that mattered, as is the trend. And the fact was, anyways, this is kind of random, but RAM is 25 times faster than SSD, and so more or less, the main problem was we were hitting Postgres constantly, and we needed to load. We literally have to hit a database every time somebody loads up a website on any customer website. So you add it to one customer that has has 1 million visitors a day or something, which hasn't happened yet, but it could happen. Our traffic would spike like crazy or whatever. And so we had to handle a lot of scale. So RAM is faster. That's kind of what it comes down to. And Redis uses RAM, but also caching is super hard. And so this is the traditional caching kind of thing. So we could just put our Postgres here, and that's kind of our backup database. Redis is in memory, and it could just crash and throw away all its data, so we have to have it in Postgres in both places. So you could just write to Postgres, and anytime you did that, you wrote to Redis, and then you only read out of Redis, and then you don't really know that the Postgres backup is bad until something goes bad. This is actually a relatively common model, but I found out that with event sourcing, you actually have some cool things, and basically it just could help you keep Redis and Postgres in sync. And then eventually, all those other things I had on the list, maybe we started pushing that later. But the cool thing is it allows you to write to the event store, which is just Postgres for us, and then you can read off the events from that event store, and then we project that kind of into Redis, and then anytime that you add something to the event store, it just kind of goes around in the circle, kind of looks like Redux or something, but except on the back end. But it actually works super well. But the downside is it was only just me and one other engineer that had to implement this. But we spent about 2 days just working on it together, and I explained all the concepts that I'd learned best I could, and we showed its benefits, and we shipped it. And turns out this was taken this is yesterday. So this is our mean response time for requests, and so it takes about 7 milliseconds to basically load up the data that's needed for a website. That's hitting Redis, so it's kind of, and that's only got 2 servers right now, and so that's pretty cool, I thought. Another metric for people that care, we get about 267 requests, or wait, I guess that's 267,000 requests per hour. Again, only two servers. Anyways, but yeah, so anyways, that's interesting. But the things that really made it interesting is just, again, fancy language features didn't make any difference. What really made the difference was the fact that I learned a concept, and I didn't explain any of those fancy features except as necessary to people, and I just showed them, hey, this just solves your problem. And then it did, and then people loved it. And in fact, we just decided to use this concept on another project because we're like, why wouldn't we use it? This was amazing here. And so, but your real question you're asking is, what about Reason? Do you sell any Reason to anyone? And so this is what I did. And so I was trying to think of a simple way to introduce Reason to my coworkers, and I just made this microservice port lookup. And essentially all it does is, you have a ton of microservices, probably more like 100 or so, probably even more than that now. But and it's kind of hard to keep like the localhost port straight. And so like you're like, what the heck is supposed to be running on this port? This just creates a little search box that you can search for the port. And it really didn't take me that long to make. I just wanted to make a small code base that people could easily learn and see what Reason was about. And the cool thing was, I just posted it in Slack, and I had a coworker that reached out to me like probably like a week or two later, and just said that it was amazing help to him, and it helped him figure out what this one app was. And so it kind of helped people, and so they liked it. And because of that, the list eventually went out of date because it was just like a static list in Reason. And then somebody just of their own free will just downloaded it and added their own thing. Like that's somebody writing Reason right there, and that's not me. I'm down there. And so, you know, it's not a big thing, but it was kind of, you know, it actually kind of got people interested in it because it solved a pain point that happened to exist at Podium. And so basically, to summarize, if you solve people's problems, they will like it, right? If the cost-benefit analysis of it is better, then, you know, if the pain that it inflicts upon you and the pain that it solves, if that, you know, if you can convince people that it actually does solve their problems, then it can really be awesome. And so I think a really good example of this is like, you know, the GraphQL PPX or whatever. Like, it really is amazingly, it basically means that if you change your server, you know all the safe stuff it broke on the front end. Like, that's a very easy thing to describe to somebody. A lot easier to describe than like variant types and like a bunch of other fancy language features. And so yeah, that's so if you have any questions, I can potentially take them now. So yeah, sorry, I kind of sprung that upon you.